Cosimo I de Medici was the second Duke of Florence from 1537 until 1569, when he became the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. Life. Rise to power. Cosimo was born in Florence on 12 June 1519, the son of the famous condottiere Giovanni del Bandinelli from Forlì and Maria Salviati. Cosimo came to power at 17, when the 26-year-old Duke Alessandro de' Medici was assassinated in 1537. As Alessandro's only male child was illegitimate, Cosimo was from a different branch of the family, and so far had lived in Mugello, and was almost unknown in Florence. However, many of the influential men in the city favored him. Several hoped to rule through him, thereby enriching themselves at the state's expense. However, as Benedetto Varchi famously put it, the innkeeper's reckoning was different from the glutton's. Cosimo proved strong-willed, astute and ambitious, and soon rejected the clause he had signed, which entrusted much of the power to a Council of 48. When the Florentine exiles heard of the death of Alessandro, they marshaled the forces with support from France and from disgruntled neighbors of Florence. During this time, Cosimo had an illegitimate daughter, Bia, who was portrayed shortly before her premature death in a marvelous painting by Bronzino. Toward the end of July 1537, the exiles marched into Tuscany under the leadership of Bernardo Salviati and Piero Strozzi. When Cosimo heard of their approach, he sent his best troops under Alessandro Vitelli to engage the enemy, which they did at Pontormo, a fortress that belonged to the Nerli. After defeating the exiles' army, Vitelli stormed the fortress, where Strozzi and a few of his companions had retreated to safety. It fell after only a few hours, and Cosimo celebrated his first victory. The prominent prisoners were subsequently beheaded on the piazza or in the Bargello. Filippo Strozzi's body was found with a bloody sword next to it on a note quoting Virgil, but many believe that his suicide was faked. Rule of Tuscany. In June 1537, Cosimo had sent Bernardo Antonio de' Medici to Charles V to gain his recognition as head of the Florentine state. That recognition came in June 1537, in exchange for help against France in the course of the Italian Wars. With this move, Cosimo firmly restored the power of the Medici, who thereafter ruled Florence until the death of the last of the Medici, Gian Gastone de' Medici, in 1737. The help granted to Charles V allowed him to free Tuscany from the imperial garrisons, and to increase as much as possible its independence from the overwhelming Spanish influence in Italy. Cosimo next turned on Siena. With the support of the emperor, he defeated the Siennese at the Battle of Marciano, and laid siege to Siena. Despite the inhabitants' desperate resistance, on the 17th of April 1555, after a 15-month siege, the city fell. Its population diminished from 40,000 to 8,000. In 1559, Montalcino, the last redoubt of Siena's independence, was annexed to Cosimo's territories. In 1569, Pope Pius V elevated him to the rank of Grand Duke of Tuscany. In the last 10 years of his reign, struck by the death of two of his sons by malaria, Cosimo gave up the active rule to his son and successor Francesco I de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany. He retreated to live in his Villa di Castello, outside Florence. Statesmanship. Cosimo was an authoritarian ruler and secured his position by employing a guard of Swiss mercenaries. In 1548 he managed to have his relative Lorenzino, the last Medici claimant to Florence, assassinated in Venice. Cosimo also was an active builder of military structures, in an attempt to save his state from the frequent passage of foreign armies. He laid heavy tax burdens on his subjects. Despite his economic economic difficulties, he was a lavish patron of the arts and also developed the Florentine navy, which eventually took part in the Battle of Lepanto, and which he entrusted to his new creation, the Military Order of St. Stephen, patronage of the arts. Cosimo is perhaps best known today for the creation of the Uffizi, originally intended as a means of consolidating his administrative control of the various committees, agencies, and guilds established in Florence's Republican past. It now houses one of the world's most important collections of art, much of it commissioned and/or owned by various Medici. His gardens at Villa di Castello, designed by Niccolò Tribolo when Cosimo was only 17 years old, were designed to announce a new golden age for Florence, and to express the magnificence and virtues of the Medici. They were decorated with fountains, a labyrinth, a grotto and ingenious ornamental water features, and were a prototype for the Italian Renaissance garden. They had a profound influence on later Italian and French gardens through the 18th century. He also finished the Pitti Palace as a home for the Medici and created the magnificent Boboli Gardens behind the Pitti, as his more prominent ancestors had been. He was also an important patron of the arts, supporting, among others, Vasari, Cellini, Pontormo, Bronzino, the architect Baldassare Lanzi, and the historian Scipione Ammirato and Benedetto Varchi. A large bronze equestrian statue of Cosimo I by Giambologna, erected in 1598, still stands today in the Piazza della Signoria, the main square of Florence. Cosimo was also an enthusiast of alchemy, a passion he had inherited from his grandmother Caterina Sforza. Marriage and family. In 1539, he married Eleonora di Toledo, the daughter of Don Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, the Spanish viceroy of Naples. Her face is still familiar to many because of her solemn and distant portraits by Agnolo Bronzino. The most famous of them, with her son Giovanni, hangs in the Uffizi Gallery. She provided the Medici with the Pitti Palace and 7 sons to ensure male succession and 4 daughters to connect the Medici with noble and ruling houses in Italy. She was a patron of the new Jesuit order, and her private chapel in the Palazzo Vecchio was decorated by Bronzino, who had originally arrived in Florence to provide festive decor for her wedding. She died with her sons Giovanni and Grazia in 1562. When she was only 40, all 3 of them were struck down by malaria while traveling to Pisa. Before his first marriage, Cosimo fathered an illegitimate daughter with an unknown woman, Theodora Medici. With Eleonora, Cosimo fathered 11 children. Maria, engaged to Alfonso di Urquell d'Este, who died before the marriage. Francesco, Cosimo's successor as Grand Duke of Tuscany. Isabella was murdered by her husband Paolo Giordano I Orsini because of infidelity. Giovanni became Bishop of Pisa and Cardinal. Lucrezia in 1560 married of Alfonso II d'Este, Duke of Ferrara and Modena. Pietro died aged 1. Grazia died of malaria aged 15. Antonio died in infancy. Ferdinando, Francesco's successor as Grand Duke of Tuscany. Anna died in infancy. Pietro murdered his wife Eleonora di Grazia di Toledo because of infidelity. After Eleonora's death in 1562, Cosimo fathered 2 children with his mistress Eleonora degli Albrizzi. Unnamed daughter died before baptism. Giovanni later legitimized by his father. In 1570, Cosimo married Camilla Martelli and fathered 1 child with her, Virginia. Married Cesare d'Este, Duke of Modena. Ancestry.